Hello. Yeah, you're both panelists, yeah. Hello?
Yes, hi. Are we ready to go?
I can't hear what's going on.
Are we ready to go, Carl?
Oh, yeah.
Carla, would you like me to make a start, or are you going to do an introduction, or how would you like it to progress?
Hey, Matt. Sorry, everybody. We're having a few technical issues on my end. Kristen is should be online soon to do an introduction, but I think in the interest of time, we could probably get started. So welcome. Can you hear me, Matt? Sorry?
Yes, yeah, I can.
Yeah, I'm just having some audio visual issues. So welcome everybody to our latest series in our webinar series. Matt Hall joining us today from the Northern Territory. May I ask, just for technical, some housekeeping, Q&A function will be working, and we'll be opening the floor up to some questions at the end of Matt's presentation. If you are having any technical difficulties, put that in the chat function and let us know what the issue is, and we can try and help it. This session is being recorded as well. So just be mindful, if you are using the chat function, that is captured in record. And it will be made available for you after today's session, probably next week. So I'll hand over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks very much. Very, very happy to be here today and to talk about one of the projects that we have with CRCNA, potential for broadacre cropping in the NT. So I've been working on this project probably actively maybe for the last 8 months or so, with the resignation of Dr. Ian Biggs, who's moved over to CRCNA in Queensland. So my involvement is really around project management and coordinating field activities, but I don't unfortunately get out in the field as much as I used to. So project overview. So we're working with three RDCs there, all funders of the work, and different state or territory departments, universities, NT farmers, and we've also got 6 commercial farms that are part of the project. And so that's really quite important for the structure of the project, and that it does really have a strong commercial focus, and a private company as well. So these are the sorts of partners, probably not that unfamiliar to people that are watching today. So one of the first aspects of the project is around compiling previous research. So cropping systems, and just about every crop on the list on the screen has been trialled numerous times in the Northern Territory. So the crops will grow. And they've all got their different benefits or drawbacks. So really, the first task that we were looking to do was compile and pull all that information into one resource, and importantly, have a function where you can hyperlink and actually get to that old resource. Some of it is scanned material, some of it's on a typewriter, that type of thing. But we're really trying to make sure that for some of this stuff, we're not reinventing the wheel, and for some of it, it's actually quite important for the modelling, which is the next step there. So we're working University of Southern Queensland, CSIRO and QDAF, responsible for using APSIM and Auscot for cotton to predict and model crop, soil, plant environment responses. So it's a biophysical model, and they're the list of crops that they've been involved in. So some of that past research is actually informing that model, and then the next step is us validating that and working to fine-tune the inputs, and therefore the the predicted outcomes of those models. And it's not about modeling crops. It's ultimately about trying to de-risk investment. So, and I'll walk through a really nice example of soybeans in the Douglas Daly region and how we patch all those things in together into a package. It's a 2.5-year project, so quite short. The way the timing works, we'll be able to get in 3 seasons of cotton, which is good. You know, but it is quite a quick turnaround on this project. Another component is natural resource assessment. So this is primarily focused around assessing soil resources and in particular their ability to hold and store water. Most of the cropping systems currently looked at, particularly the cotton. Cotton is really central to this project with the other crops, although we're trying to certainly incorporate them and support them. Cotton is a clear focus of this current project. But what we're trying to do there is a lot of that development is around dry land or wet season production, and so an understanding of soil water holding capacity and soil resources is actually quite pivotal. So we're doing those resource assessments. It's basically trying to understand which land is appropriate and where is that land for further development. Most of the existing cropping that's happening, that has happened in the last few seasons, is typically on existingly cleared land that's primarily been used for grazing or hay production. So, you know, would have been cleared for reasons when that was done. And so we're trying to assess the viability of these crops. We've got field trials, and that's sort of broken up, or the way that we think of it's broken up into 2 components. So around validating these APSIM and OSCOT models. And so we're doing that for cotton, peanuts, mung beans, and chickpea. And then the other components is really industry-led research. And this year we've been doing some work on nutrition and row spacing, because that's what we're getting a clear signal from the growers as part of this project, and from the broader industry and the NT, that they're the questions or the aspects they don't currently have adequate answers to. So we're trying to address that. So trial sites, for those maybe not familiar with the Northern Territory, we've got a northern zone around Katherine and Douglas Daly. This is traditionally a cropping area. Rainfall, you know, supports cropping in this region during the wet season, and the focus crops are really around cotton, as I mentioned, and then trying to incorporate other grain crops. And I think what we've seen in the last few years is a focus on wet season cropping with cotton, and as things develop, we'll need to start to look at, well, what are the dry season irrigated rotations that move around these other crops such as cotton. And then we've got a southern zone in Ali Kurung, Neutral Junction, Tea Tree, that sort of region. And there's a clear focus on peanuts and also some mung bean work going in there. And in that southern region, the current focus there is hay. You know, hay is you know, a consistent low risk option, and so it's really competing for pivot space with hay, which is sort of a more it's a lower value perhaps, but also lower risk venture. So some of the preliminary results to date. I mentioned the compilation of past research. So this is not really you know, ultra exciting, but it does pull everything into one place, and it assists us moving forward and with the discussion around cropping systems in Northern Australia. So these are the list of crops that we're looking at. We're compiling information that looks like this. We're still in the process of defining what the resource will look like, whether it will be an online portal, whether it will be you know, a PDF, or how it will work. But what we're really trying to do is hyperlink the resource so that researchers, investors, other interested stakeholders again, get in touch with that original research. And here we've got an example of mung bean. And an example, these are just on the far right column, these are just government annual reports or mentions of these crops and the research in annual reports, but we're also looking at published literature and other sources across different library databases. Here's a good example, which is a reminder, and certainly a reminder to me when I visit our research station in Katherine. These crops have been growing here and been trialled here for quite some time. We're trying to capture that, what knowledge we can from that and move forward. And so that's what this part of the project's about. And we're looking to produce a public-facing document. Soil resources. So this is some work that's been completed with our colleagues at Department of Environment, Parks and Water Security. And they've been going out into trial sites and taking soil cores and then doing the analysis and profiling those soils at different depths for different factors. And so this is just an example of what's coming out of that. I can certainly share this report if anybody's interested or would like the full report. These are two soils. The top one is from Ruby Downs, which is one of the commercial farms that we've got trials on this year, and the bottom one is from Tipperary. And so what we're trying to do here is capture information, and the clay is pointed out there for its importance in water holding capacity. So trying to understand which soils and where and what sort of cotton crops will they support under different seasonal conditions. And I mentioned we'll be able to get 3 cotton seasons out of this current project. And so we're trying to build that knowledge of the soil plant environment interaction. We already have quite a lot of information, as I'm sure other jurisdictions do, around soil characteristics. So we've got not only soil coring occurring, but we're doing some pits to categorise soil into different families and measure horizons and so on. And we're also loading that information on natural resource maps, which is there on the right. So there's actually it depends on the point as to how much information is there, but there's actually quite a reasonable amount of existing information around soil resources. So this is a sort of zoomed in version. The area there with the red is the Douglas Daly Research Farm, where we have some trials this year on row spacing, which I'll touch on shortly. And this is Ruby Downs, I mentioned, which was one of the previous soil profiles. So, each of those points represent a location where there's known information about that soil. It may be variable, but each of those points does have some descriptive characteristics. So we're adding to that. So when we take the soil cores, a new point gets added to the graph, and that helps to build the knowledge. But we're really trying to work out where is the land that will support particularly dry land cropping in the first instance. Where are the water resources perhaps for supporting dry season irrigated cropping, and what are the soil characteristics around soil water holding capacity, etc. And then enabling infrastructure. So not just infrastructure such as shown here with a irrigation infrastructure, but also roads, power, and all these other enabling factors. So, and really that is to support and try and de-risk development of cropping systems. So we're doing modelling, as I mentioned. I'm not a plant modeller. I have worked with APSIM a small amount, but we're relying on the experts at University of Southern Queensland, CSIRO, and QDAF to do this work. So I'll just touch on it briefly, but there's more information there on the website if you want to, if you're not familiar with it and you're interested in it. So basically, using a soybean example here, so we have existing information on performance of soybean and other crops. I've just used this crop as an example in the Northern Territory. And what they're able to do here is to start to build the biophysical model. And so that each point here represents a measured yield, biomass, days to flowering, or days to harvest. And so that is in the background of these models. So we are developing them with real regional data, but then we're having to validate them. So what it allows you to do now is to start looking at crop comparisons. So I've just pulled this out as an example. DDRF is Douglas Daly Research Farm. Douglas Daly as a region is certainly a focus of cropping in the Northern Territory. And what it allows you to do is compare crops here. So this is some of the work from University of Southern Queensland. And what it's indicating is that when you compare all of these crops, soybean on a volume, on a tonnes per hectare basis, seems to be the most productive crop to grow when compared to the others. And then it also allows you to look at cropping windows and when you may, what would be the optimal time for planting. And so that's the figure on the top right. And so, you know, for maize, soybean, mung bean, the ideal planting window would be August, is what the model is predicting. We then need to, of course, back test that, and that's what we're doing with cotton, peanuts, mung bean, and chickpeas. So we're actually back testing the model performance. What did it estimate under these conditions, and what did we actually achieve? So we also need to put an economic lens over it. So it's not good enough just to say that soybeans will produce the biggest biomass yield. We also need to look at the economic factors. And so one of the ones that we're looking at in particular, just in this example, is a variable cost. So how much do you need to produce to effectively break even? That allows us to look at some comparisons. So here we've got a figure where the dark column is the tonnes per hectare, which came from the predicted AppSim model. And then the light grey column is the yield needed to cover variable costs. And so what that clearly shows is that sorghum and maize are going to really struggle to be able to cover variable costs. But that soybeans, in this case, the model's predicting, you know, slightly over 4 tonnes per hectare, and we need to produce at least 1.5 tonnes to cover our variable costs. So it's an indication of you know, like I mentioned before, a lot of these crops have been trialled back to the 1930s and 40s. It's not about will the crop grow, it's about you know, will it economically provide a consistent return. And so this is a tool to help form those discussions. So I just want to talk about average yields for cotton. I think some may be interested in that. So these are our aggregated yields for last year for dryland and irrigated. And dryland, there were six growers, and irrigated 4. So these are the types of bales per hectare that are currently coming from the Douglas Daly Katherine region. This year we've got about 3,500 hectares grown, which is quite an increase from the starting point of around 800 a few years ago. So yeah, you know, this year there's been additional growers come on board. Existing growers have expanded their planting, so it's really quite promising. So I haven't delved into any detail today. If for those that are really interested in what we're measuring when and so on, I'm certainly happy to follow that up after this. We're measuring all sorts of, we're actually going over the top, I think, which is a good thing, I think. But just I wanted to run through 2 of the trials that we're doing this wet season. These have really been driven by the NT Cotton Growers Association. We approached them and said, you know, we're collecting all these variables to help validate the model, and that's ultimately to try and de-risk investment decisions and so on. But what practically do you need to improve decisions? And they came back with very clear advice around, they'd like to know more information about row spacing. And the primary reason for that is around maintaining soil moisture, particularly towards the end of the crop. So we've put in, it's about, I think, 8 hectare trial. So the trials that we tend to do are not small replicated trials. They are sort of larger, semi-commercial or imposing a trial over a commercial planting. So here we've got the plots are 32 metres wide by 190 metres long, and we're looking at row spacings of 0.5, 1 metre and 1.5, which is shown across the bottom there. Dry land, this is all dry land. The next area that they indicated they need some assistance with or more information on is around nitrogen and its application, either from a rate perspective or the fourth point down there looking at 100 kilograms, but in a split application with half of it applied initially and then half of it applied 30 days after sowing. And the idea there is, if you're putting it all up front, the plants are very small at that stage. You're getting a lot of rainfall, you're getting leaching and so on. So again, a larger plot size here, 24 metres wide by 800 metres long. This was on Ruby Downs, one of the commercial farms we're working with. Very unfortunately, the paddock was sprayed with the incorrect chemical, and it caused the bulbs to abort. So we've had to, I think we spent maybe 2.5 months measuring different characteristics on that trial, but we're unable to continue through to completion on that. And that's just a factor of working on farm, but there's also a lot of benefits to doing that, of course, as well. There's other work going on. So these are examples of dry land work. We're also looking at water use efficiency and soil probes on irrigated or supplementary irrigated areas. So there's really quite a lot going on in that space. The peanut work in Central Australia is going quite well. The yields there are averaging sort of 2.5 to 5 tonnes per hectare, and it's very much a learning curve with the cropping systems there. Or similarly, the other two collaborating farms in that region, issues or challenges around access to equipment and these types of things in quite a remote area has been quite challenging, I think, for the project and also for them. So other items coming up. So some of you may be aware. If you're not, then just a quick note here around enabling infrastructure. So they've decided to start construction on a cotton gin to process a lint, of course, and they've landed on a site with, I believe, construction planned to start mid this year. It's pretty bold move, but I think certainly it indicates a long-term commitment to cropping and to cotton in particular. I'd just like to plug NT Field Days, which are coming up and which will be discussing related issues to do with this project, and they're in Katherine and Douglas Daly. So Katherine on the 27th of April and Douglas Daly on the 28th, 29th. I'd say the Douglas Daly one will certainly have much more of a cropping focus. I think the Katherine one will have perhaps more of a livestock focus. So thank you very much, and I'd welcome any questions. Sorry, Kristen, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I can't get things together today. I had a nice speech to say about you at the start of the video, so that's gone out the window. I'll do a bit of fielding of Q&A for you, Matt, if you like. So we've got one that's come in from Cara. She has asked a question, but I think I'll read it out to you and you see if you can answer it. I think she meant it in a different way, but I'll read it out. Is the compilation of information across the entire top end or strictly NT?
Good question. At this stage, we're focusing on NT. The focus of this particular project is NT, but we're certainly not myopic in the sense that, if it's going to work in here, or if the information has been produced here, then it may be of use to other areas.
Great. Chris has asked, will you do EM survey to find out what variables are?
The EM survey, could Chris elaborate?
Chris, could you please elaborate? Hang on 2 seconds. Graham's coming. Graham, agree. It would be good to pull together data from all jurisdictions. Yes. Chris has come back with EM supplies the clay content of soil across the field. So the original question is, are you going to be doing some EM surveys?
I couldn't answer that, Chris. I'd have to defer to my colleagues in Department of Environment that are doing that work. I'd be surprised if they aren't. They're doing a pretty thorough assessment, and you know, within a particular field, you know, there might be 6 to 10 soil cores, and they're doing full profiles and so on. So I'd be surprised if it's not, but I'm not familiar with that term.
Okay. Kara's asked another one. Does the economic analysis GM take into account market access or opportunity, so existing or potential?
So no, it doesn't. It just takes into account the gross margin, the cost for variable to cover variable costs, and the aggregated commodity price domestically. And so it's used to. You're right though. There are market access. There are other factors that contribute to that. If you grow a ton of sorghum in Katherine, it's probably, from an economic perspective, quite different to growing a ton of sorghum in, you know, on the east coast of Australia, as far as transport and etc. So no. But what we're trying to do is take that information that's already out there around gross margin work that's been done through CSIRO and the Northern Australia Water Resource Assessment. There's another one happening for the Roper River at the moment, and we're trying to say, well, which, you know, not just plant all these crops, that shopping list of crops, but which crops actually will produce or are estimated to produce an adequate yield that will allow for adequate return for the investor, the farmer. And so what we're trying to do is sifting process for that, and then actually plant those crops and either confirm or otherwise their productivity from a yield perspective. So there's lots of other questions though.
Thank you for that, Matt. We've had another question come in from Vicky. She's asked, am I correct that you were saying that you need 20 tonnes per hectare of sorghum to cover variable costs?
Correct, and it's partly to do with the very low price relative to the other crops. So yeah, that's exactly right. But it's also, you know, it's not 20 tonnes, but it's 20 tonnes under the factors that we're looking at. So I think from memory, the APSIM model is predicting a yield of 2.2 tonnes in the Douglas Daly region, and so yeah, in order to cover those variable costs, then you're needing a much higher yield. Where the soybean example, for example, is showing, you know, you're only needing 1.5 tonnes a hectare to cover those variable costs.
And Graham's come in with an interesting comment. He said the yields achieved for cotton mirror those we've been achieving in the Gilbert River catchments over the last 3 years. So.
Okay, great. And I think the thing to add, I was meaning to the cotton yields. I just thought that'd be interesting for those watching today. But the last year's season, I tried to look at where the rainfall sat on the long-term average, but the last 2 wet seasons here have been very dry, and so last year's dryland results are really, you know, I think the average for Katherine rainfall, the average is around 950 mil, and last year we were somewhere between maybe 650, and a lot of that rain occurred early on in the wet season and not much at the end. So it really reflects actually quite a poor performance under quite a poor wet season. But the learning curve is is pretty steep. I think it's really supportive. It's really encouraging, rather, to see that that farmers are certainly talking amongst each other. Their agronomists and consultants are, to an extent, doing the same, and certainly wanting to learn and improve year to year.
Okay, cognizant of time and that we kicked off a bit late, so I've got 2 more questions here, and then maybe if anyone's got some last ones they want to kick in. So Graham asked whether corn yields achieved from rain-grown crops.
I imagine that relates to the input data for the AppSim model, and I'm sorry I couldn't answer that off the cuff right now. I'd need to go back to University of Southern Queensland. I wouldn't even hazard a guess, but that would be accounted for within the model. You know, whether that yield was achieved with or without irrigation.
Yep. Okay, and lucky last, Cara. It would be good to see confidence intervals around the yield predictions. Also important to take this into consideration in economic analysis to describe risk.
Yeah, I pretty sure that all of the bar graphs had some form of error, whether it's standard error of mean or some other standard approach. But I agree, yeah, it needs to be a range. So not just basing potential on the mean or the average, but probably actually the lower quartile.
Excellent. Okay, well, as always, we're always a fairly open book with our project. So if you have any other questions that we haven't answered today, please feel free to email through to Matt or myself, and our details are all on our website. Thank you, everyone, so much for your time today. And thank you, Matt, for your great presentation.
Great. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.